chapter 5 of Luke. Jesus is going to start calling disciples now. So this first story here, there's a couple of people involved, a couple of disciples involved, but the story is really going to center on Simon, aka Peter. He is later going to be a leader in the church, if not the leader of the church. Simon is already familiar.
Hang on. Can I just rewind a second? You said Simon, aka Peter.
Yes. His name is Simon, and he is also known as Peter. He's the same guy.
Okay.
There is in some Gospels a scene where Jesus renames him Peter, which would mean that his original name was Simon, and then he got a new name of Peter from Jesus. But that's not recorded in all of the Gospels. So just Simon and Peter are the same guy. So sometimes he's referred to. I'm sorry?
I was going to say, is that their name in Hebrew?
In what is it? In Hebrew? Well, yeah,
Simon. Because they sound pretty English names to me, Simon and Peter.
Oh, well, yes. It would have been Simeon in Hebrew and Petros in Greek.
Wow, that's very dramatic.
Okay.
Petros, yes. Petros means rock.
Why would they use a Greek name, though?
Well, in one of the Gospels it says that he actually calls him Cephas, which being translated into Greek, is Peter. So, where is that? Because Cephas is stone.
But that Cephas sounds a little bit like Simeon, which if those are both Hebrew, hey presto, we have two names.
Yeah. In John 1:42, when Jesus looked at him, he said, "You are Simon, son of Jonah, Simon Bar-Jonah. You shall be called Cephas," which is translated a stone, or Peter.
A rock.
A rock.
Hard place.
Yes.
Alright. Cool.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to talk here primarily the focus is on Simon. And Simon is already familiar to Jesus in Luke. His mother was the one who was healed. His mother-in-law was the one who was healed in the last chapter. Whereas in Mark's version, Mark has a much shorter gospel. He just gives the bare bones of what he knows. In Mark's gospel, this is the first time that they're meeting. That's in Mark 1:16 through 20. It's also possible that this miraculous catch that we're going to talk about is somehow related to a story in John, the fourth gospel, but the way that it happens in the fourth gospel is actually after the resurrection. So trying to correlate it with that gets really complicated. Anytime you try to correlate anything, really, between the synoptic gospels, the first three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, with John, it always gets really complicated really fast, because John wrote a different kind of gospel. He wrote a gospel that had a lot of theology in it. It was a much later gospel where he had already had a time to work through a lot of the ins and outs of who Jesus was and what that meant, and had a lot of time to reflect on the things that Jesus had said. He wrote his gospel probably in the 90s, AD 90s, whereas Mark was written in AD 60s, and Matthew was probably written in the 70s, and Luke was probably written in the 70s as well. So it has less developed theology in the early bits than in the later. Okay, so to begin, Verse 1. So it was, as the multitude pressed about him to hear the word of God, that he stood by the lake of Gennesaret, and saw 2 boats standing by the lake, but the fishermen had gone from them and were washing their nets. And then he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's, and asked him to put out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the multitudes from the boat. When he had stopped speaking, he said to Simon, "Launch out into the deep and let your nets down for a catch." But Simon answered him and said, "Master, we have toiled all night and caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your word, I will let down the net." And when they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, so their net was breaking. So they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them, and they came and filled both the boats so that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For he and all who were with him were astonished at the catch of fish which they have taken. And so also were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who were partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will catch men." So when they brought their boats to land, they forsook all and followed him. Okay. 2 different kinds of net fishing. I want to try to paint this picture to get a picture in your mind of what's going on here. There's 2 different kinds of net fishing that could be done. One, you have a casting net, which is used during the day, and you do it from the shore. So a person standing in shallow water throws the net out to the water and drags it back in. And this is the method of fishing for the poor fishermen who had no boat. They would just try to catch what they could from where they were standing. Then you had, if you were wealthy enough to have a boat, then you had a drag net. And that kind of fishing you did at night. And then in the morning, you would come in, you'd wash your nets, and you would repair them, and then you'd go out again the next night. So here in Luke, they're sitting there washing and repairing nets, so it's probably morning. And then Jesus comes there, teaches for a little while, and then tells them to go out into the deep. By now it's probably the middle of the day, and drag your net for fish, which is absolutely ludicrous because you don't do that during the day, you only do that during the night. So he's asking them to do something that even if they were expecting to catch something because there was lots of fish in the water, they wouldn't be expecting to catch it right now because it's the middle of the day. So but before he sends them out there, he does this bit of teaching. He gets into the boat, Simon's boat, go away from the land a little bit. So he puts a little bit of distance between himself and the people. And then he sits down, which is the appropriate posture for a rabbi to teach. Prophets stand up and talk. Rabbis sit down and teach. So the crowd disappears after he's teaching the multitudes from the boat. He stops speaking, and suddenly we don't hear anything more about the crowd. So possibly Luke is trying to put 2 different stories together. One where there's a crowd and one where there's not. Either that or he's just trying to squish the story down. Luke, a scroll could only hold a certain number of words before the scroll reached its maximum length, and then you had to stop writing because it would get too heavy. The scroll would just be too heavy. So it had a 30-foot length, was the longest that a scroll could possibly be, and then you rolled it up on both sides. Luke's gospel is 30 feet long. It is that he used every bit of his available material in order to be able to write his gospel. So he has a very long gospel. And then he did the same with Acts. It's very long. It's the maximum length that he could possibly put onto a scroll. So if he had stories that could go together, it makes sense that he would try to condense them down so that he could fit them, because he wanted to fit everything. So he cut out some details here and there in order to get stories to fit together. That makes perfect sense that he would want to do that. And sometimes it could make it potentially feel like it's disjointed because he had to do that.
You're saying that Luke wrote Acts?
Yes, Luke wrote Acts.
I thought it was someone else.
No. Luke and Acts are actually two parts of one story. You've got the story of Jesus, and then you've got the story of the church after Jesus' death and resurrection. So it's actually all part of one long story that Luke was telling. There are actually theories that Luke wrote a third book. That, because a lot of times the typical storytelling thing in Hellenism was a trilogy. So you have part 1, part 2, part 3. And
What's Hellenism?
Hellenism is the Greek culture of the time. So there was a tendency to do a 3-part story. So we've got part 1 and part 2. There's no part 3, at least that we've found. But it is also curious that part 2 ends on this horrible note, which we'll talk about when we get there. The book of Acts ends terribly. It's a terrible way to end a book. So it's really weird that he chose to end it there. It feels like there is more story that goes on the end. And we do, if we compare it to other stories of the time, we would think that it's possible he actually intended to write another one. Okay. So when Simon answered and said, Master, we've toiled all night and caught nothing. This master that he uses here, this word in Luke's rich and beautiful vocabulary that he uses, all kinds of words that nobody else uses. This master is the opposite of a slave, and it is used only by the disciples here. It appears to be Luke's equivalent of rabbi, which he avoids completely unless he has to use it. Luke has... Sorry?
Because he's reading to a different audience.
Yes, he's reading to a different audience. He's reading to a Greek audience. So the non-disciples call Jesus a teacher, didaskalos, and the disciples call him master, epistates. So there's a distinction between what they call him, but in no case is anybody calling him a rabbi. Okay.
Why is that? Is that bad?
No, it's not that it would be bad. It's just it wouldn't have any significance to his audience, because if you understand the Jewish culture, then you understand what it means to be a rabbi, what it is to have a rabbi. This is a respected teacher who has lots of followers that they raise and train, and all of the culture involved in rabbinic schools of thought and traditions, and you have a heritage based on who your rabbi was and who their rabbi was before them. All of this stuff is really important to the Jews. It's not important to the Greeks. They don't care. A teacher's a teacher.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
he doesn't want to get into anything different, really distinct, but he also wants to distinguish between the general population who look at Jesus as being a teacher and the people that he is doing all the one-on-one with, his inner circle disciples.
Okay. Yep.
I like the part where they catch these fish, they fill their boats, and then they're beginning to sink. And when Simon Peter saw it, verse 8, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, for I'm a sinful man, O Lord." Where is this happening? In a sinking boat?
Mm-hmm.
Is it when they get to shore? They actually get to shore a little ways later in verse 11. So when they brought their boats to land, theoretically, this is actually happening in the sinking boat. So this boat is beginning to sink. Everybody is frantically trying to get these fish, and Peter takes a break to fall down at Jesus' feet and say, "I'm a sinful man, O Lord."
Yeah.
So
Just a quick self-check there.
Yeah.
It's
I think it's a bit.
one of those things that you see about Peter's personality quite early on. He does things to the immediate and the extreme. He is very emotional and impulsive and does things that sometimes don't even make sense, but he does them with vigor because he's Peter. And that's what he does.
Should it mean that he's saying, "Oh, go away from me, Lord. I'm a sinful man. Like, oh, I don't deserve this," or something like.
Yeah,
or
possibly.
Something like that. It's close to that. Am I right, Lord?
Yeah, possibly. Just in realizing the sense of unworthiness and the sense of fear is typical of people who find themselves in the presence of God or the presence of an angel
Yeah.
or
Okay.
anything like that. So that actually lends credence to the idea that when he's saying Lord, it's not just that he's saying sir. Because the same word is used whether you're saying Lord in the New Testament, whether you're saying Lord as in like God, the word for Yahweh, or if you're saying Mr. So-and-so, Sir
Or
so-and-so.
could you be fleeing that the boat didn't sink, and that was his way of saying, please don't kill us?
Yeah, well, please don't kill us. That's a good idea. Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord. I've never thought of that, actually. Please don't judge us
Thought it was
and
his ways.
have us all die.
Don't kill us with this blessing.
Don't kill us
Yeah,
with this
I'm
blessing.
simple.
Yeah, okay. That's a
Yeah, but
different...
I'm a simple man. Please, can you not let us drown? Let us get back to shore.
Well, they wouldn't have had the... Yeah. I mean, it kind of supposes that Jesus would have been intending to kill them when he allowed them to catch this massive amount of fish. So... yeah, okay.
Yeah, but his boat is sinking. His boat is sinking because he's pulled up all the fish they possibly can, and they've taken on too many, and he's now pleading to Jesus to, okay, I've made a mistake. I've taken up too many fish.
But Jesus made the fish come. Jesus did this miracle. They shouldn't have caught anything. It's the middle of the day. So it was a miracle that they would catch anything.
But then they were so greedy, their boat started sinking.
Okay. Yeah. It makes sense of it. It's an interpretation that makes sense of the of the declaration. Yep. Okay. Randomness. Yep. So when they brought their boats to land, they forsook all and followed him. So the first calling of the disciples, but he's already been chilling with Peter and his mother-in-law, so they aren't actually his first actual disciples. The point of putting it here probably just emphasizes that the disciples know what they're getting into. So we put this calling of the disciples after the typical day of Jesus. Jesus does a bunch of miracles. He gets rejected. He gets threatened with death in the synagogue where they, wanted to kill him. He's already defined his message, and we've already seen a day in the life of, and now he is calling these disciples, and these disciples are willingly following him. So they know what they're getting into. This didn't just come out of the blue. Okay, so the next section here is dealing with leprosy. Okay, leprosy in Jesus' time is not the same as leprosy today. Today, it's a bacterial infection that causes nerve damage.
Okay.
That's what leprosy is today.
So
That's what
different
it's
back then.
it's referred to. Yeah. In biblical times, it was a much broader, what do you call it? Diagnosis. Yes, it was a much broader diagnosis. Pretty much any kind of skin disease, whether it's contagious or whether it's not, chickenpox would have been leprosy. It's a skin disease that's contagious.
Like dermatitis.
Yes, dermatitis would have been leprosy. Some of them are incurable. Some of them are quite temporary. If you got something wrong with your skin, you got out of the city because you were unclean. And when it went away, if it went away, you came back to the priest and said, look, I'm clean. They looked you over. They made sure that you were clean. And they said, yes, absolutely, you're clean. Do a sacrifice to God. Now you can rejoin the community.
Acne?
Probably. Yeah. Any. Yeah. Yeah. The lepers were not allowed to be touched in case it was contagious. You didn't ever touch a leper. Rabbis actually regarded healing a leper was no more or less difficult than raising the dead. So it is just as difficult to heal a leper as to raise the dead, according to the rabbis.
Or is easy.
Or as easy, yes. If you can raise the dead, then you should be able to.
You should be able to sneeze and they're healed.
Yeah.
Sneeze on their face.
Because of the early association between sin and leprosy, remember Miriam when she challenged Moses in Numbers 12, she was infected with leprosy as a judgment for her challenge against Moses when she was trying to incite rebellion and challenge his way of doing things. She got leprosy. It may have also been included among the diseases that were expected to no longer afflict men in the Messianic age, but there aren't any Old Testament scriptures for proof text of that. It was just kind of a thing that everybody knew, and we don't really know why we knew it. But in the Messianic age, when we have this Messiah king and the world is all wonderful, there's not going to be any leprosy. So that was the expectation. All right, in this section that starts with verse 12, we have the formula of a miracle story that you see in oral transmission. We had talked before about how there are different patterns, even tropes, for things to be recorded, remembered. There's a particular pattern that oral transmission stories will follow so that it will help you to jog your memory of how the story goes. It is supposed to follow a particular pattern. So the formula of a miracle story for oral transmission. We have the problem get stated. We have the address to the miracle worker, please help me. We have the statement of faith. We have the act of faith, the statement and method of healing, and the confirmation of healing. And you're going to see all of these things play out here as Jesus cleanses this leper, which he will do by touching him, which is against the law. So, okay, starting at verse 12. And it happened when he was in a certain city that, behold, a man who was full of leprosy saw Jesus, and he fell on his face and implored him, saying, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Then he put out his hand and touched him, saying, I am willing, be cleansed. Immediately the leprosy left him. And he charged him to tell no one, but go and show yourself to the priest, and make an offering for your cleansing as a testimony to them, just as Moses commanded. However, the report went around concerning him all the more, and great multitudes came together to hear and be healed by him of their infirmities. So he himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. Okay, so this disease, is this a demonic disease?
No.
No, not a demonic disease. There's no exorcism that goes along with it. There's no discussion between demons. There's no blaming demons for it. There are diseases that are caused by demonic forces, but this is not one of them. This is not regarded as one of them. Likewise, the fever in the last verse, or the last chapter, was not regarded as a demonic disease. So there's no exorcism here. All diseases are not associated with demonic oppression. There is just some things that are a result of living in this world, and there's not demonic oppression going along with it. But likewise, that doesn't mean that we just have to accept it, because, as in this case, even though there was no demonic oppression, he could still get rid of this and heal it, even though he didn't have to cast out a demon in order to do it. So he charges him to tell no one. This is the so-called messianic secret. That is a technical term, actually, in theology. The messianic secret. It's less emphasized in Luke than in Mark. It doesn't seem to hold any kind of real theological significance for Luke, but it does in Mark. It makes sense here that the man shouldn't talk to anyone before getting his clean bill of health from the priest, which is what Jesus tells him to do. Tell no one, go and show yourself to the priest and make an offering for your cleansing as a testimony to them, just as Moses commanded. Kind of suggests, do not pass go, do not collect $200, go directly to the priest and give your sacrifice and be declared clean. So, period. And Luke also doesn't draw attention to the fact that this man who is no longer a leper went out and did precisely what he was told not to do. In the other versions of this story, it is explicit that the man then ran out and told everybody that he knew Jesus had cleaned him.
Is that a bad thing? Like a sinful thing?
It was the exact opposite of what Jesus told him to do.
Yeah.
And the consequence...
Reverse psychology.
Yeah, reverse psychology? Okay.
He wanted him to tell people, because how could you keep that a secret? But if any kid knows, if you're told not to do something, of course you're going to go and do it.
Yeah. But it had the consequence that he wasn't able to do, in Mark, where it says that he did that, he wasn't able to preach there anymore or do more miracles there because of all of the commotion that it caused. So he kind of did mean it. Don't do this. And the man went and did exactly what he wasn't supposed to do.
Why? Because he touched an unclean person?
No, the man did exactly what he wasn't supposed to do. The man went and told everybody about Jesus. Jesus said, "Don't."
That'd be a bad thing.
Well, it was a bad thing because it got a lot of let's go look at it. Yep, Mark 1, starting in verse 40. Now a leper came to him, imploring him, kneeling down to him, and saying to him, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Then Jesus, moved with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched him, and said to him, "I am willing, be cleansed." And as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy left him, and he was cleansed. And he strictly warned him, and sent him away at once, and said to him, "See that you say nothing to anyone, but go your way, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing those things which Moses commanded as a testimony to them." However, he went out and began to proclaim it freely and to spread the matter, so that Jesus could no longer openly enter the city, but was outside in the deserted places, and they came to him from every direction. And it also doesn't say that he ever did go catch the 2 birds that he needed to take to offer as a sacrifice, or that he ever went to show himself to the priest. He just went out and proclaimed what had happened to everybody freely. Okay, so back in Luke 5.
So the reason for it is so he didn't get mobbed while he was trying to enter that city.
Yeah.
That's because obviously he met the leper outside of the city, and since the leper went in front of him, and then proclaimed it to everybody, then anybody and everybody would try and mob him as he's trying to get into the city. And he didn't want that at that particular time.
Yeah. So he stayed out in the deserted places, and then they all came out to meet him
Anyway, yeah.
in the deserted places. Yeah. So he had nowhere to go to be alone.
Yeah.
And in Luke, he said about the wilderness.
I'm sorry, say again?
I said in Luke, he says about going to the wilderness, doesn't he?
Right. He himself often withdrew into the wilderness and prayed. So he has to go, he has to get away from all of these people from time to time. He has to be able to do this in order to keep his sanity, because they all want his attention. And it's draining. One of the things that, I don't know if you've ever seen a healing service that has happened, a church healing service that has happened, or if that's ever happened in any churches, denominations that you've witnessed. But one of the things about when you see somebody set up, when a pastor sets up a healing line, and they will pray for everybody on that line, and they'll go down and actually lay hands on everybody who is in that line for healing or for deliverance or for whatever it is that they're praying for, that they're needing God to touch them. That pastor will do that. They will go through and they will touch every person, and they will pray over every person, and sometimes they might prophesy if they have a word of prophecy for the person, word of knowledge or whatever it is they'll do for every person. And then if you ever see them after they do that, they're exhausted. And it's not the exhaustion of just walking from one end of the stage to the other. It's the amount of emotional and spiritual energy that it costs to pour out of your own spirit all of this stuff to help other people, and then afterwards you're just drained. So Jesus is doing this every day. He is completely pouring out every day, and then he needs to recover. So he needs to get away from the people and have some alone time to just fill himself back up so that he can go out and pour out again. And he even does, like at the beginning of the chapter, where he puts some distance between him and the people, get in a boat and go out into the water so that you could just get some distance between you, because you guys are really coming too close. Yes. I need some space away from you. All right. So in doing all of this, Jesus is not only healing, he is usurping all of the traditional methods of attaining healing that's set in place by the religious leaders of the time. So it's as if his cleanness is contagious. There's this sort of almost an irony here, where you have leprosy being the contagious uncleanness. A leper had to leave the city because they were contagiously unclean. Well, Jesus is the contagious cleanness. So he is cleaning even the unclean things, like the leper. Okay, we're gonna do another section here. Now it happened on a certain day as he was teaching that there were Pharisees and teachers of the law sitting by, who had come out of every town of Galilee, Judah, and Jerusalem, and the power of the Lord was present to heal them. Them who?
Sick?
Well, it doesn't really say the sick.
Mine does.
Does it?
Yeah, to heal.
The power of the Lord was
paralyzed?
present for him to heal the sick.
Okay, well, if you change words around and add a few in there, then you can get that rendition. But if you don't add any words, now let me just make sure I check the Greek here. If there's any other versions, other manuscripts. Nope, no other manuscripts. So that is just added in. Power of the Lord was present to heal them is all that it is in Greek. So, yeah, he's preaching to and healing the Pharisees and the teachers. So the other religious leaders.
So is he healing them? Not just the general public.
On a certain day, as he was teaching, there were Pharisees and teachers of the law sitting by. We're making a point of the fact that there's Pharisees and rabbis sitting there. They'd come from every town of Galilee, Judea, and Jerusalem. And the power of the Lord was present to heal them, to heal the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. So this is not the anti-Pharisee language that we see elsewhere, particularly in the fourth gospel. These are rabbis and Pharisees that are coming to Jesus, and he is healing them. Then behold, men brought on a bed a man who was paralyzed, whom they sought to bring in and lay before him. And when they could not find how they might bring him in because of the crowd, they went up on the housetop and let him down with his bed through the tiling in the midst before Jesus. The house owner, I'm sure, was thrilled. In some versions, it was Peter, whose house was getting the roof ripped off.
Right.
He wasn't thrilled. When he saw their faith, he said to him, "Man, your sins are forgiven you." Okay, so the friends had faith for healing, and then Jesus forgave the sins. This is a bit awkward.
Yeah.
It was commonly thought that sin resulted in sickness. We see that showing up like when the disciples asked Jesus, whose sin was it who caused this man to be blind? In John 9, was it his sin or his parents' sin? And he said nobody's. But it was commonly thought that sin resulted in sickness. Okay, so the sin needed to be dealt with before the healing could commence. But interestingly, it's the faith and initiative of the friends that initiates this, not the man's own faith or repentance. So Jesus forgives the man's sins on the basis of their faith, which makes you kind of wonder, is this theologically sound? Because in most places, a man is responsible for his own relationship with God. If you have a relationship with God, then you have a relationship with God. You don't get the rewards of a relationship with God because your parents had a relationship with God. You are accountable for your own relationship. So, why did this work? Why is it that when he saw the faith of the friends, he said to the man, "Your sins are forgiven you"?
Maybe his sins made him paralyzed? I don't know.
Yeah.
That could be. No.
But even so, how was Jesus able? We say that in order to receive forgiveness from sins, we have to ask for it. I mean, we don't have to cut ourselves and do a dance and stand on our heads and all of this other stuff, but we do have to ask for it. But Jesus is not responding to the man asking for it. He's responding to the man's friends. So it would be like if you ask for your mother to get healed, of cancer and she gets saved instead.
Okay.
And
I thought he was saying it to the paralyzed man. But he's saying it to the guys who were lifting him down.
well, when he saw their faith, so
Yeah.
the friends were the ones with the faith,
Yeah.
and the man was the one whose sins get forgiven.
Okay.
So the man doesn't necessarily have any faith. We don't know if the man has any faith at all.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you might know.
Because he. Yeah.
Yeah, you might now.
Yeah.
Now that his sins are
Yeah.
forgiven. The
Is this a point when it comes to the next paragraph? Was this leading to a point though?
yeah, it was leading to a point. But even just how can you forgive somebody's sins on the basis of the faith of somebody else? It's not theologically sound.
But they're the good people they surrounded themselves with.
No, it's not theologically sound, but it is God's way. He does the unexpected when you don't expect it.
And I think that's kind of where the only way that I would be able to go with this is,
Don't put God in a
yes, there may not be a theologically sound explanation for why this works. Jesus can do what he wants. And there is no way to theologically justify what he is doing here. But he did it. And he meant it, and he knew what he was doing.
But could he have not meant that good people, bad people aren't going to be surrounded by good people? And this man has not only himself being blind, this is a blind man, yeah?
Yeah, no, he was paralyzed.
Oh, okay, so he's a paralyzed man. But he's surrounded by good people, which means that Jesus could be saying you are a good person as well, because it's their faith. They wouldn't have faith in you if you were not worthy of this.
Well, they had the faith in Jesus. Their faith was in Jesus. But he could have assumed that the man, I mean, and this is Jesus. We don't know what Jesus was thinking, knowing, sensing, perceiving of this man. So this he could have been looking at this man and instinctively knowing that this man, even though he wasn't speaking, was repentant. We don't have that information. He could have been assuming that this man would have the same faith as his friends. We don't have that information either. But what we do see is that he saw their faith, the faith of the friends, who lowered him
We
down.
also know that if he was paralysed, he would have been quite a burden to his friends, family. They would have had to have helped look after him. So maybe it was about giving them the miracle of the fact that this would free them up.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Possibly. But it's still, it begs the question of why he was forgiving the sins of the man. Did he have to forgive the sins of the man in order to heal him, and healing him was the point? Which is another possibility that we'll see as we go on. The scribes and Pharisees, verse 21, began to reason, saying, "Who is this who speaks blasphemies? Who can forgive sins but God alone? Only the offended person can forgive the offender." So God may state his offense, or he may forgive that offense through a prophet or through somebody else. But it ultimately is the position of God. They're not necessarily or even likely questioning at this point whether Jesus is God. That is far beyond their capability to question. They're questioning if he's a legitimate prophet. Because God can forgive through prophets. Somebody who's speaking for God. So they're questioning if he's a legitimate prophet. Prophecy was believed to have ceased a long time ago. So they're questioning if they have a legitimate prophet here. They're not asking if Jesus was God. But when Jesus perceived their thoughts, he answered and said to them, "Why are you reasoning in your hearts? Which is easier, to say your sins are forgiven you, or to say rise up and walk?" It's a silly question, really, because man can't do either one. But one who has the authority to do the latter also has the authority to do the former, and vice versa. "But that you may know that the Son of Man has power on earth to forgive sins," he said to the man who was paralyzed, "I say to you, arise, take up your bed, and go to your house." Immediately he rose up before them, took what he had been lying on, and departed to his own house, glorifying God. And they were all amazed, and they glorified God, and were filled with fear, saying, "We have seen strange things today." Okay, so we have this the last thing that I want to talk about here, because we're going to go ahead and stop there at verse 26. The last thing that I want to talk about is here we have this Son of Man title being introduced. We talked about this a little bit last week, or maybe it was the week before. The Son of Man and the Son of God. Luke does not create a fresh, distinctive theology of the Son of Man. He simply uses what's already there in his source, which was probably Mark. This is the way that Mark preserved this saying of Jesus, and this is the way that Luke takes it over, but he doesn't expound on it at all. The title is ambiguous. It doesn't mean anything specific. It could mean simply a human being. But that really makes no sense at all, because it's definitely not the prerogative of any human being to speak on behalf of God regarding offenses. So it must mean something more. The Son of Man was an apocalyptic figure. We see him in Daniel 7, 13, and 14 is where we have him in biblical text. And the title, the person of the Son of Man, is further developed in 30 some odd chapters of an extra biblical book called Enoch, First Enoch, which is an interesting read. It's not scripture, but it is an interesting read about the way that people thought in the time of Jesus and slightly before the time of Jesus. So the Son of Man is not expected to dispense forgiveness per se, but he does have the right to act as judge and ruler, and so therefore he implicitly has the authority to proclaim someone innocent because he is the judge. So, and this is that guy that my professor defined as the quasi-divine figure with an ambiguous relationship to God. That's the Son of Man. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and stop there. And we will start next week with Matthew the tax collector in verse 27. Any comments, questions, notes of any kind on today?
Well, I learned why Jesus didn't want him to tell anyone. I didn't really consider why before. I didn't know why we'd want to keep that a secret, but now I know.
The messianic secret is something that actually causes a lot of discussion in scholarship, because the big question is, why did Jesus want to keep himself a secret? You have a liberal school who consider, that's the left wing school, that says, well, Jesus didn't have any idea that he was the Messiah. So he didn't want people telling people that he was the Messiah because he didn't know that he was the Messiah. Which I think is not a position that I agree with. I think it's far more likely that he knew who he was. He just did not want everybody else knowing who he was. And then the question is, why? Why didn't he want everybody else knowing who he was? And that's a big theological question that's got all kinds of little tangles in it.
It's because people wanted him dead, like any sort of Messiah. That that said that
Yeah.
they were, like any person that said they were the Messiah, they just killed them. So
The
scared.
Romans did kill a lot of messiahs. The Romans did kill a lot of messiahs, yes. And the Jews expected something of the Messiah that Jesus knew he had no intention of doing and being. So he didn't really want everybody calling him the Messiah. Because while on the one hand he never denied that he was the Messiah, he didn't want everybody talking about it because it wouldn't be good. On a number of levels. You're going to get the Romans are going to crucify you, and the Jews are going to be very upset that you're not fulfilling their expectations. So there was no advantage to be had.
On the other hand, too, when you get people being people, and the word spreads very quickly when something like this is, there could well be a people-driven rebellion.
Yeah.
That's actually not ever going to be fulfilled on a false presumption.
Yeah.
And that will cause all the people to be in a problem. Not necessarily Jesus himself, but it will cause the people to be under fire from the authorities at the time.
Yeah.
There's probably more to protect the people rather than him.
Yeah, and that's entirely possible too. I mean, when the Jews did petition for Jesus to be crucified, it was on the basis that when they talked amongst themselves, they decided that it was better that one man should die than that the whole nation should be persecuted by the Romans because of this one man's actions. So they did want to protect themselves. And it is reasonable to suggest that Jesus may have wanted to do that as well. May have wanted to protect them. So, all right.